Today's reading is titled, "In Surrender Lies Victory." Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. A case might be made for surrender as a path to victory in worldly conflicts. The way of passive resistance, for example, in preference to armed resistance. But our point here concerns a higher kind of surrender, the surrender of our deluded egoic will to the wise and almighty will of God. Human will is, as Paramahansa Yogananda used to say, guided by whims and limited understanding. The divine will is in harmony with every level of reality. Though the divine will sometimes appears to us at first to be wrong, it proves always, eventually, to be for our highest good. Human will is inconsistent. It leads us one day to success, another to disaster. The divine will, when we surrender to it completely, though it is not always easy to do so, always brings us deep inner peace and joy in the end. Jesus Christ demonstrated this perfect surrender to God's will in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before he was captured and imprisoned, preparatory to his crucifixion. He went apart from the others to pray and asked them to pray also. But when he returned to them, he found them asleep. Out of his love for them, he excused them, saying, "The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." He then urged them again, saying, "Pray, watch and pray." Their weakness in those circumstances was particularly sad, and the disciples themselves must have regretted it bitterly later on. We all know the symptoms of human weakness, though we may excuse them in ourselves, saying, "Well, after all, I'm only human." But what are the signs of true strength? We find in all cases that these are the fruit of a life wholly surrendered to God. The Bhagavad Gita lists these signs in the 13th chapter: humbleness, truthfulness and harmlessness, patience and honor, reverence for the wise, purity, constancy, control of self, contempt for sense delights, self-sacrifice, perception of the certainty of ill in birth, old age, and frail mortality, disease, the ego's suffering, and sin. Detachment, lightly holding thoughts of home, children, and wife, those ties which bind most men. An ever tranquil heart, heedless of good or adverse fortune, with the will upraised to worship me alone unceasingly. Loving deep solitude, shunning noise of foolish crowds. Calm focus on the self, perceived within and in infinity. These qualities reveal true wisdom, Prince. All that is otherwise is ignorance. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. Well, this topic, "In Surrender Lies Victory," is can seem like a subtle one at first, and one that can be misunderstood when we think of, as Swami was saying in the reading, when we think of surrender in the worldly context that people normally think of it. Surrender, we surrendered the war and we gave up, we were defeated, or I surrender the wrestling match, you win. And there's that connotation of feeling like we lost and we're defeated, and that it's not something that we normally want, right? But the surrender in this case is a different kind of surrender, and I think the misunderstanding can come when we're misunderstanding what the I is. The I surrender. That I is the ego, and that ego is not us really. In the end, the ego is just a misconception, a misunderstanding, and in the end, then we're just surrendering our limitations. We're surrendering that misunderstanding of who we really are to God. Yogananda defined the ego as the soul identified with the body, and Kriyananda further explained that it's a bundle of self-definitions, and those self-definitions are what gets in the way in the end between us and really being able to receive God's presence in our life. Jesus said, "As many as received them, to them gave he power to become the sons of God." But it's difficult to receive when our hands are full. You can imagine yourself, you're going on a trip, and maybe you're going to stay there for a while, so you've packed a bunch of bags, and you got a couple suitcases you got to carry on, and maybe a laptop, and you come out of the plane, and you're going to meet a friend, let's say, at the airport, and you come out of the plane, you got all this baggage, and you're coming, and your friend is there, and you haven't seen him in a while, so he's got a present for you, a two-handed present, and he wants to give to you. But you can't take that present from him if you're holding all this baggage that you have, and it's baggage that we carry along with us, all of these conditions and these definitions that we have. We've got to let go of all of that baggage. We have to surrender it all to be able to receive the gift that God's trying to give us, the divine light that we're hoping to merge one day with. I shouldn't say hope, that we will merge one day with. As it says in the Festival of Light, "I offer the little light that is in me into thy blazing light of infinity." And so it might be easier to think of that, the word surrender, instead think of it as a self-offering. Because in the end, there's the ego, yes, and we have these self-definitions, we know what they are. But the soul bleeds through, doesn't it, too? There's a number of soul qualities that we have, and especially as we get further on in the spiritual path, when we're ready for a guru and we're ready for higher teachings of meditation, our soul comes out more. Our soul qualities come out more to the fore, and we can offer those to God as well, that little light that's in us into that blazing light of infinity. And what we're really doing in the end then is we're saying, I want, instead of to be the little wave, I want to become the whole ocean. I want to offer my wave back into the ocean, to offer what little I have, what little light that I have into that greater light, and surrender it so that all there is left is the ocean. There's a beautiful story of Narada, where he's walking with the Lord Vishnu, who is that aspect of God that's the sustainer of creation. Brahma creates creation, and Vishnu sustains it, and then Shiva destroys it in the end. And he's walking with Vishnu, and after having learned the secrets of the universe, after being liberated in God, and he's walking with Vishnu, and he says, now that I understand the secrets of creation, it seems so ridiculous that people get caught in the delusion. It just seems so obvious now that God is all there is, and that's all we would want. How is it possible that people get caught in this delusion, this Maya? And Vishnu says, well, I will answer. I will help you understand. But first, can you get me some water? Because I'm kind of thirsty. They were walking through kind of a deserty area, I guess. And he said, I'm kind of thirsty. Can you get me some water? And they noticed a little town on the horizon. He said, "Could you get me some water from over there?" And Narada said, of course, I'll go get you some water." And he walked off through the desert, and he finally got to the town and was looking for some water, and like he found the well, and he found that, and there was a beautiful lady there, and he started talking to her, and they really hit it off. And you can see where this is going. So one thing led to another, and she invited him over to her home to meet her parents, and he had a meal with them, and they talked, and things went on, and things progressed, and they struck up a relationship, and they he eventually asked if he could marry her. He asked the parents, and they were delighted. They loved having Narada there, and there was such harmony between them. It was so easy to get along, and they got their own place, and they had, he figured out a trade. They were able to help him have a trade that he could have, and before you know it, one baby came, and another, and a third baby, and life was idyllic. Life was wonderful. And then a 100-year flood came and started to flood the whole city, the whole town there. And before you knew it, they realized they needed to get out, but it happened so suddenly. And they were trying to walk through these waters that were rising rapidly, and Narada had the little baby on his shoulder and the other two children in his hands, and they were trying to wade through the water. And at one point, he slipped on one of the rocks, and his hand let go of one of the children, and it was carried away. And he went to reach out to grab the first one, and the other one was carried away. And as he was doing that, the baby fell off his shoulder, and they were all, before he realized it, all of his children were carried away in the flood. And his wife was so distraught that she couldn't hold herself up anymore, and she was carried away. And he couldn't believe it. He had such a wonderful life, and now, before he realized it, his whole family and his whole life were gone in the flood. And he let himself be carried by the flood and was swept away, and he lost consciousness. And before long, he regained his consciousness, and he realized he must have been washed up on an embankment or something, and there was water around him. And he remembered what had happened, and he started to weep and cry for the loss of his family. And then before long, he heard a voice, "Narada." "Narada." And he looked up, and it was Lord Vishnu. And he said, "Narada, what's going on?" What's going on with you? And God, I imagine, sometimes asks that of us too when we're in the middle of things. What's going on? I said, "I sent you half an hour ago to go find a cup of water, and now I find you crying in the sand." And that's the power of delusion, that we think it's all so real. We think it's all our reality, when really it's all just a dream that happens in the blink of an eye. And we'll wake up with God before long, and He will be there with us. But it's difficult because it's easy to get caught up, isn't it? It's easy to be attached to this reality, but it's really just ego in the end. It's really just these self-definitions that I'm this person, and I have this family, and I have, all of these things. And it's not that we don't need to reject them. We don't need to just say, my family doesn't matter, and I'm just going to leave and reject. That maybe was the Kali Yuga way of being able to deal with it. That was the most we could understand. It's either this or that, back then. But now we can understand, because there's a subtler understanding of energy and consciousness in Dwapara Yuga, in this higher age. We can understand that it's not a matter of rejecting those things, but in understanding them as a reflection of God, and that God is in all of these things, and that if we can see God in our children, God in our husband or our wife, God in our family, then we are connecting with that divine reality instead of seeing it as an attachment. My family, my friend, we're seeing, oh, this is God coming to me through these instruments. This is God coming to me through the world. And in so doing, we are surrendering our ego, even though it may not seem like it, because we're surrendering that thought that anything is ours. Even that little light that is in us, we're surrendering it, realizing that I know it's your light, God, and I'm offering it back to you because I know that nothing is mine in the end. But it takes, even though there's that word surrender, it's easy to think of, when we think of surrender, as an energy drop, right? Okay, I give up, but we're not saying I give up, God, and I'm just, you do whatever you do through me. There's that humorous story that Swami Kriyananda told when he was giving one of his first talks, and he remembered that Master said, well, let God speak through you. And he said, well, okay, but how am I going to have God speak through me if I'm doing all the talking? I got to shut up, if I'm going to let God speak through me. And so he proceeded to have, I forget what it was like 2 or 3 minutes of silence. And, that's a long amount of time to just be standing up here in silence. I could sit here for 10 seconds and it would start to feel like, what's going on, 2 or 3 minutes he stood there. But he had to test it out. And it was a realization came to him. He realized, God can't talk through me if I've determined to be quiet, right? God has to have a channel to work through. And so that's the subtle aspect of it, is we need to surrender, but we have to have will, and a dynamic will and a conscious surrendering in the acts that we're doing. So it takes us using our will and our willingness, the kind of less powerful stepbrother of will is our willingness, to be able to get through all of the steps that we need to take through in life. I mean, at first it's willingness, right? Are you willing to accept the things that are, that you suffer when you do this, and that this brings you joy? Are you willing to come to that realization even though you're attached? And are you willing to maybe take small steps, towards God? But in the end, it takes a lot of willpower to offer up the ego. In the Mahabharata, a number of the characters are representative of qualities that we have within us, and the one that's representative of ego is Bhishma, and he's kind of the grandsire. He gave up the throne willingly, and he gave up any claim to having a family or anything like that, and because he did that, he was granted a boon, and that boon was that he could choose when he died. He could choose his moment of death. It was his choice. And Yogananda said that that's indicative of the ego, because the ego cannot be destroyed until it chooses to let go. But it takes all our willpower to work with that, because it's not something we can just think our way out of. We can't just say, okay, God, I'm willing to let go. Here's my ego, free me. It's not just a mental affirmation. It takes a complete self-offering. It takes, it really, in the end, it takes our devotion being completely focused on God instead of all the other things that we are devoted to and don't realize it. That's where all those self-definitions come, where we want to life to be this way, we want it to be that way. We have this personality, and why do we have the personality? Because we want to act this way in the world, and we want to have control over things in certain ways, and that's one of the things we have to let go of. is control. And what that really means in the end is being willing completely and totally to follow God's will. And it's not always easy. We can say, I want God's will, but, sometimes we end up saying, God, what's right for me to, we have a choice. What's right for me to do? This thing or that thing? I want this one though, God, but that doesn't, it doesn't help. It's not a complete willingness to do God's will when we're still holding out, when we're still trying to control the world around us. I'm still getting used to, talking in these Sunday services. And if I had complete faith, I could just, not prepare at all and just say, God's going to speak through me, and I will get up here and God will speak through me, and not think it through at all. But I'm still working on it, But there's a certain amount of self-offering that needs to go into it. And as I was thinking about it, and there's the need to let go of having to be prepared. Why do I feel like I have to be prepared for the talk? Because I'm concerned that it's maybe not going to go. Like I won't be able to speak. Like I won't. What happens if I don't speak well? Then things don't work out. And you want things to work out well, right? And you want people to hear the message. There's this certain amount of control that we have in a thing, and it's not so bad. Wanting things to go well, wanting the message to get across to people. We're trying to communicate these teachings and share them together, and those are all good things. But there's this certain amount of ego in that. I realized that there's this certain amount of, okay, I need to prepare so that things. If there was no ego. I remember seeing, Swami give talks, and, he would just get up and he would just start talking. And there was just, you could tell he hadn't thought it all through, and he said he would tune in to what people needed to hear and just receive the guidance from God in the moment. And that's where we want to get. We want to get to the place where we can just receive God's guidance in our life, each step that we take. And then we're not asking, well, God, should I do this or should I do that? We're feeling the guidance. We're feeling the impetus to move in a certain direction. We don't have to weigh it all in our minds. Okay, God, tell me what I should do, the red tie or the blue. We're just moving the way where God is moving us. As Swami Kriyananda said about later in his life, he said Kriyananda is an event. I feel like Kriyananda is an event that I'm responsible for, and that's what it takes when we're to giving up the ego, is looking at ourselves more impersonally, looking at ourselves from a place of sort of stepping outside of it and realizing that yes, we're responsible for this event. But it doesn't matter if things go like this or things go like that. What matters is our attunement with the divine. What matters is that we've offered up all that we have into that infinite light, and that it's guiding us in everything that we're doing. Swami Kriyananda has a wonderful phrase that he said, "What comes of itself, let it come." And it's a wonderful thing for many reasons, not least of which is that what comes to us is only and always is meant for us. That's the law of karma. That nothing will come to you if it's not meant for you to have. And so one good reason for accepting anything that comes to us is because the more we do that, the more with humility we allow ourselves to work through the karma that's ours and accept whatever comes to us, because God is working through the world to give us what we need. Especially when we say, God, I offer my life to you. Everything that comes to us is going to be for our own good. It's only a matter of us understanding why and how. As Yogananda said, Conditions are always neutral. It's how we respond to them that makes them good or bad. We can think of opening a pickle jar and it lands on our foot. We might think, well, that's not so good. It hurts and so forth. But how we respond is completely up to us. And that's where the good and the bad comes, where our thoughts of good and bad dictate how we respond, doesn't it? It dictates the conditions we've put out dictate how we respond. So we've put out a condition in our mind that when a pickle jar falls on our foot, we're going to be upset, right? And so then it happens, the pickle jar falls on our foot, and we're upset. But it's already a preconceived notion in our mind, hasn't it? When something happens, if somebody sideswipes us, that's not going to be good, right? And in traffic, and so we're going to have a certain response because it's not good. But we can start to reprogram ourselves by offering up these egoic responses to the divine. And the next time something happens to you, we can start with it being small. The next time something lands on our foot, we can instead just think, oh, thank you, Divine Mother. You must be working out some karma. How wonderful. Now there's less karma that I have to work out, isn't it? Or you can just think, oh, well, try to take it impersonally. Oh, well, okay, there's pain, right? Maybe I need to get an ice pack for my foot. It's too bad that, well, at least the pickle jar didn't break, So, try to look at the bright side of things. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to find the silver lining. But, if we step back, every time there's something that affects us, if we can step back, have the presence of mind to step back and just look at it and say, what's the most beneficial way to respond? Because getting all upset that the pickle jar fell on our foot isn't really going to help the situation. It's not going to change what happened. It's not going to change the pain in our foot or anything like that. It's only going to make us more ruffled and uncentered. So if we can just have the presence of mind to step back for a moment and say, what's the best course of action for me to take? How should I respond to this, God? And that's where if we're including God in everything we do, if we're offering up our life to God in that way, then we can include Him in all of those little things that happen to us. This concept of self-offering, though, is one that necessitates tests. Yogananda said that God will test us. Particularly, the more we offer up to Him, the more God will test us. At first it'll be the pickle jar on the foot, and then, maybe we'll have some other larger test that will happen, or another one. And God's trying to say, okay, you were able to offer up that little pain that's related to ego to me. Can you offer this up to me? Can you offer this up to me? We can do it. Again, we can do it mentally and say, okay, I want to offer my ego to you. But it's in the cold light of day that we really earn our stripes, that we really have the conviction that the ego is just this concept that we can let go of, that we can offer to God. And so God will test us, and it's not always easy. That's where we learn what the ego is all about, you might say, and how we can really offer it. And that's where our willpower comes in. Yogananda said, you must be able to be unshaken amidst the crash of breaking worlds. I remember the other day when something was happening and I was getting stressed for some reason, and it didn't really matter. All these things happen. And I sat there and I just think, what am I going to do? I thought, well, this isn't even the crash of breaking worlds. This isn't even close to it. I need to be able to stand unshaken with this. I need to be able, and really we need to raise our energy at that point when we're letting ourselves get caught in all of this stuff. It takes raising our energy, and that's why willpower is so necessary in all of this. There's a beautiful chant, though, that Yogananda wrote, and we don't often hear it that much, but it's a wonderful concept that he raises within it. It goes, in the valley of sorrow, 1,000 years or till tomorrow. But I'll wait to see only you, just you. My heart's aflame, my soul's afire, just for you, just you. And he was telling us in that chant, the proper attitude of a devotee, being willing to wait 1,000 years or till tomorrow. That's what we need to be willing to. Why is that a challenge? Because we think of the passing of time as something that is difficult. We have to wait, and it's all a part of that ego construct that we have. But if we can be willing to wait 1,000 years or till tomorrow, whatever it is, wait for you, God. That's the attitude we should have, where we're ready to go to do whatever is needed to find God. And that's when we're going to be able to offer everything that we have up to God's light. There's a beautiful story. It reminds me of Sri Ramakrishna, who was an enlightened master. And at one point, I think he was telling one of his disciples how long until he found God. And he said something like, you will find God in your next life. And so the disciples kind of seen an opportunity. They each started asking him, well, what about me? When will I find God? And they said, it'll be 3 lifetimes, and it'll take you 2 lifetimes, and it'll take you in this life, and then they wanted to ask him about his foremost disciple. They thought, well, surely he'll be the least amount of time of all of us. And they asked him to come, and at first he said, no, that's fine. But they said, no, please come, And he said, okay, Master, how long? And he said, for you, it'll be 1,000 lifetimes. Sorry, it's a beautiful story. And all of the disciples went, oh boy, how terrible! We didn't realize, And that disciple walked out. He went out into the porch and went and sat out there. And they said, "Oh, the poor guy. If we had known, maybe we wouldn't have had him ask." And so they went out to try to comfort him, and they found him weeping with joy. And they said, "Brother, didn't you hear? He said it would be 1,000 lifetimes." And he said, "Didn't you hear? He said I would find God." And Sri Ramakrishna came to him, and he touched him on the forehead, and he went into samadhi. But he did that to show his disciples the true attitude of a devotee. That it's the knowledge that we will find God is what brings us bliss, and the rest of it is details. It doesn't matter when. It doesn't matter how we get there. It doesn't matter if we understand what the ego is. What matters is that we love God, and we want Him above anything else, and that's how we will find Him. God bless you.